Tonight we're in the cathedral city of Lincoln, and welcome to Question Time. And good evening to you at home. Welcome to our audience here and to our panel. The Conservative Party Chairman, Grant Shapps, Labour's Shadow Energy and Climate Change Secretary, Caroline Flint, the leader of the UK Independence Party, Nigel Farage, the chairman of the pro-EU lobby group, Business for New Europe, Roland, and the Professor of Classics at Cambridge University, Mary Beard. Thanks very much. And our first question from Andy Pearson, please. Andy Pearson.
Lincoln has seen JJB, Blockbuster, Jessop's and now HMV fall victim. Soon everything will be boarded up. Is the internet killing the high street?
All these shops going, everything will be boarded up. Is the internet killing the high street? Caroline Flint.
Well, there's no doubt that buying online has transformed the way people shop. If I look at my 3 children, the way they shop is very different to the way I do still, and the way my family and grandparents did. And one of the issues that's been raised this week is, firstly, how shops like HMV, Blockbusters we've heard about today as well, and Jessop's have managed to deal with that challenge of the internet. But the other side of it is it a fair situation where it does seem that those on our high street have to meet certain requirements that the online shopping services don't? And I think we have to recognise people want to shop in a different way, but I do think we have to look at whether there should be a fairer way to get a better level playing field between online and high street services. Well, there is issues that I understand about, for example, the way free postage can be provided. Certain taxations aren't as heavy on the online services, and also don't forget that at this present time, with VAT, that's hitting the retail side of things as well. So
it's that rather than recession, you think?
No, I think there's a number of things. I think recession is playing its part. We did ask for a reduction in VAT because we thought it would help, actually, our shops on our high streets. But there are other aspects at play here about the way we actually shop today compared to the way we did in the past, and how businesses keep up to date with that and provide maybe both shopfront and online services. But there's also, I think, a concern about what we've heard recently with Amazon and other organisations about whether they're paying their fair share of tax. Okay. And I think that's worth looking at as well.
Grant Shapps.
Well, I used to be the shops minister, so I was really trying to grapple with some of this. And we asked Mary Portas to do a review, and in the end I accepted 27 out of her 28 different recommendations. But the truth is, on the high street, it's a real battle, as Caroline says. You're up against the online world, and we're all probably using online. One fact that just amazed me when I looked at the HMV and Blockbuster, obviously they're both in parts of the market where people can download rather than go visit the shop. One thing's amazing, there were 26.5 million albums downloaded last year. That was a quarter up on the year before. How can any HMV-type business survive in that environment? The truth is, we can adopt all of Mary Porter's recommendations, but the high street has to change and is changing for those reasons.
Because she said you weren't acting quickly enough and wondered whether it was whole thing was a PR stunt.
Well, I know is pleased to hear, because she's been involved in the work subsequently, that we have adopted, as I said, almost everything that she suggested, and we came
in the
up with
last 3
months of her.
She said this just 3 months ago.
Well, we've got lots. I mean, I can run through all 27
no,
if you like, but we've got lots in there.
All right,
but I actually want to make just one wider point, which is that, this is about HMV, Blockbuster, Play, Comet. The interesting thing is, you might be guided to think that, therefore, all the companies are closing down. Actually, one of the interesting things is the more new companies formed last year than any time in history, 450,000 of them. Okay. So it's not a one-way street.
The man there in blue in third row.
So modern day shopping has changed, and a lot of people do it online, but it still comes down to investment in local authorities. You go down to any high street in the UK, I'm from Grimsby, it's just gloomy, it's boarded up. Why would you want to go and shop there and spend your money when actually half the time it is easy to do at home? Going into town and the high street these days isn't a pleasant experience.
Does it matter, do you think?
Absolutely. If you have a nice high street, people will go out because there's other things to look at. But a lot of times you go in there because there's no investment, it's downtrodden.
Okay. And the woman there in the second row.
I think petrol prices and also parking in the high street has a part to play, because I think very carefully when I go down the high street now, because it sort of involves, especially in rural Lincolnshire, maybe a 20-mile drive to Lincoln, and that is petrol, and then it's very expensive to park.
So do you shop online, do you?
I do shop online, yes, I do shop online.
And of course,
hold on. Roland Rudd.
Well, I think there is a role for a shop like HMV, and I think actually one of the things that I hope that comes out of the administration is a new HMV, a smaller...
When you say administration, you mean being virtually going bankrupt?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And because I think there is a role for it, because I think people do want to actually browse and actually choose, as well as online. The problem for HMV is, I mean, now I can remember when it went from records to CDs, and they were actually hauled in front of the select committee for actually charging too much, and they're getting too many profits. So it's gone from an extraordinary success story to a terrible disaster economically. And the problem is it wasn't well managed, and unfortunately it has suffered from that. But I do think there's a role for it. And I do think it's important for the high street, because we can't just rely on things online.
But is it coincidental? I mean, not just HMV, Jessop's, Blockbuster, JJB, they weren't all badly managed, were they? Or are you saying they were all badly managed?
No, they weren't.
Got their comeuppance?
No. I don't think they're all badly managed. About 200 of these type of companies have gone bust, which is serious and is worrying. But unfortunately, they do have to adapt and change to consumer needs. And I think the problem with HMV, too many people can tell you they went into HMV stores, they didn't get what they wanted quick enough, fast enough. And you know, if you can get a different type of HMV to come out and be slimmer and be quicker and more efficient, it can work.
Okay. The woman in the white there, in the third row from the back. Yes.
I think this issue actually predates the internet, because in my work in rural community development, about 5-10 years ago, probably more than that, we were talking about out-of-town shopping centres killing off the high street, and large retailers like Tesco's and Morrison's expanding their offer and pretending to be the retail for the high street when in fact they're not, and then having a lot of impact on producers because they can drive prices down because of the amount of goods that they can buy.
Okay. You sir, in the green, then I'll come to Mary Beard. You sir.
Me.
Yes.
It's unfortunate that HMV have gone bust, but haven't they shown a lot of contempt for their customers? They were selling gift vouchers up to the day before they actually went bust, and now they're invalid.
Yes. Mary Beard.
You get more protection online.
I suppose if they're broke, they're not allowed to pay on their
Yeah, but you do get more protection if you shop online, don't you?
Yeah. Mary Beard.
No, I think the high street is dead important, but I don't share the sentiment about HMV that some people do. I mean, if you go back to the 70s, you know, just remember what it was like trying to buy a record in the 70s. You had to queue up for a little booth so you could listen to it and then decide whether you wanted it. And you had to wait for ages, and then you had to wait for ages to pay. It wasn't a great retail experience. But I think a bit more seriously, I think that online shopping is not quite the panacea that we all think. I mean, this Christmas, I was really fed up with what I remembered from last Christmas, which was all these things which said, your parcel should arrive in 3 days, and here it is in tracking. And, you know, by the time I got it, it was January the 7th. You know, so I rediscovered shopping this Christmas. You know, I went to a real shop, I touched the stuff, I picked it up, and I took it home with me, and I thought there's life in this yet. You know, actually, online has its place, but shops are nice.
Okay.
So don't give up.
Nigel Farage.
Well, I think the answer is that the internet is partially killing the high street. There are two other big factors. One is the supermarkets. You know, we used to go to supermarkets to buy groceries. Horse burgers, all that sort of thing. But you go into these big supermarkets now and you look, for example, at the range of children's clothes and the price of children's clothes. They're so cheap, they're astonishing. That actually, you know, most responsible mothers and fathers will now go and buy clothes there because they're saving a lot of money. And the second big phenomenon and big change is this massive growth of out-of-town shopping centres. I live 20 minutes away from, in Kent, the Blue Water shopping centre. It's absolutely huge. Every major retailer that exists is there. I prefer the high street, you know, and I like to go meet people and walk down the high street.
That's because you're doing politics.
Well, I don't always wear a rosette doing it, although, well, maybe I do, really. But actually...
You wouldn't buy a bra on
I've never bought a bra. You've absolutely got my word on that.
Rumours online.
But if you think about it, you know, if you're going shopping, and again, I go back to perhaps the mum with a couple of kids, if you go to the high street, finding a parking space is difficult, then they charge you an outrageous sum of money to park. Go to Blue Water, there's 10,000 places, it's safe, secure parking, it's free, you haven't got to wear an overcoat, you haven't got to carry an umbrella, and your children, you're not terrified where they are the whole time because they can actually walk around because you haven't got passing traffic and cyclists and aggressive pedestrians. So I can understand why people have opted for the out-of-town centre, and I don't want to be too pessimistic about the high street, but we understand there are another 140 major chain retailers in very serious trouble, and I'm afraid, like it or not, there is going to be much more retrenchment on the high street.
OK, I'm going to take one or two more points, then go on to another question. The woman there with fair hair, blonde hair, yes, in black.
I just wonder what the panel think about the fact that companies like Amazon and can be global and can pay tax wherever. Obviously, we've got to address the situation in city centres, and I think that could there be a way that we could look at sort of help financing things through indirect, direct taxation of sort of internet.
Well, you could even the balance between the high street.
Well, local government.
Grant Shapps, would that be feasible?
Yeah, I think there are things that we can do. By the way,
you're planning to do anything?
So for example, one of the things that we have done is to try to spread the costs of increases in business rates, which have only increased for many years now at the same rate as inflation, but allow those to be spread over a period of time. I think actually high streets survive when they are fun, interesting places to go. You can't join friends and have a coffee online. You can't have your hair cut online. There are certain things that we always need high streets for, and they need to reinvent themselves in that way.
Let's go on. Nida says, you know perfectly well, you can join in this debate. It's one of the points of question time, either by texting us or through Twitter. Our hashtag, you probably know if you Twitter BBCQT. We've got our special panellist tonight on Twitter, Harry Cole, who writes for The Spectator and Guido Fawkes' blog, and you can follow him at BBC Extra Guest. If you're texting comments to 83981, press the red button to see what others are saying. Let's have a question from Joanna Benton, please.
Can public services cope with yet another influx of migrants when we open our doors to Bulgaria and Romania this time next year?
This question, because this part of England has had very large influx of immigrants to work in agriculture primarily. Can the public services cope with yet another influx when Bulgaria and Romania are entitled to come here next year? Nigel Farage.
Not really, no, and nor should they have to. I think it is completely irresponsible, wrong, in fact damn stupid, to be opening up our doors next January to 29 million people from Romania and Bulgaria. Just bear in mind that nearly 50% of the Bulgarian population are living on or below the poverty line. This is a real poverty line. You know, people are actually struggling to eat. Give you sort of some idea of how poor it is. The average monthly salary in Bulgaria is €200 a month. A pensioner gets €100 a month. I mean, it is a country, I'm afraid, in a terrible state. The judiciary is not independent. The mafia basically runs the economy. If I was a Bulgarian, I'd be packing my bags now, wanting to come to Britain. And I feel sorry for the people in Bulgaria. But frankly, as the recent census figures showed, you know, I'd been going around saying that 3 million had come in the last 10 years. I was wrong. Officially, the figure was 4 million. If you add the illegals, possibly 5 million. And at a time when we have youth unemployment in Britain already running at 21%, we do not need more oversupply.
So what should be done? Because the question is whether public services can...
What should be done?
You can't do anything to prevent people coming.
What should be done, frankly, David, that is why we need a referendum very quickly on our membership of the European Union. Because we cannot control immigration policy into this country and be a member of the EU. I wish everybody in Bulgaria and Romania well, but it's a national health service. It's not there, frankly, for the rest of the world.
Grant Shapps.
Well, one thing that we have done in this case is to extend the controls so that people couldn't come here right at the beginning of the moment that the countries joined. That was different to what happened when many of the previous, there was a group of 8 countries who joined, and there was a very big movement of people. That means that this particular releasing, people able to come here now, comes at the same time as they can go to places like Belgium and France and Germany and many other countries. So it means that they won't just necessarily come to this country on their own. We've got to think this through. One of the things that I did when I was housing minister was to introduce controls for local authorities to be able to say people actually need to have some local residency before they can jump to the top of the housing queues. One example of how you can protect some of the public services, and that's now in place, and there are others. But I do have to say, to people who take the kind of view that we shouldn't have any kind of movement of people at all, that's fine. We probably have a couple of million people who have to call back from Spain, who are Brits who've gone and lived in the south of Spain.
This is not the point.
Because actually the free movement of people, of course, works in both directions.
This is not... Hang on. This is not the point at all. How many are going to come?
You've made your point. Just wait a minute.
Wait a minute.
There are other people on the panel, and I'd like to hear from them. I'll come back to you. Don't worry.
I want to know, David, how many people are going to come?
That was precisely the question I was going to put. Okay. Eric Pickles says that he doesn't believe the figures he's got yet. Does the government have any idea how many people might come?
I think one of the problems that this government's very aware of is that the official predictions made before Poland and all those other countries joined turned out to be wrong by a power of 10. Now, the difference this time is, as I said, there's a lot more countries who are opening up at the same time, so there are a lot more choices. And people actually may well go to countries where there are historic connections, which may be places like Germany and Belgium and others. We are very keen.
Is it? This is what you hope?
Well, look, this, by the way, was a negotiation that took place before we were in government. Right. We are in a position where even if you went for what Nigel Farage says he wants, which is to change this, we cannot change it by this October. So we are where we are.
Joanna Benton's question was, can the public services cope?
Well, look, my concern when I was in charge of one part of that, social housing, for example, was concern that we couldn't cope, which is why I changed the rules there to enforce some kind of, or ability for local authorities to say, if you've been in the area for long enough, that you've worked in the area and you've contributed to the area, then that's one thing. But if you've just arrived here, then you're not going to be on the top of the list for social housing. And I think that was a positive change.
Roland Rudd.
Well, when we opened up our borders in 2004, it's absolutely true. We had about 500,000 Poles who came to Britain. And they came here to work, and only 0.06% actually took benefits. And I think it was a great credit, and it was a great thing for Britain that they came here, and we benefited enormously from them. When it comes to Bulgaria and Romania, as Grant says, they've got many other countries to go to as well as us. But, you know, the European Union gives you the right to come here to work, study, or to marry. It doesn't give you the right to come here and take benefits. It's true. No, it doesn't.
It does.
No, it doesn't. After 3 months, the government does give them benefits. Now, I think the government can look at that. No. I think the government should look at that. I think 3 months is not long enough. But we don't have to wait for any direction from Brussels. We can actually do something about that ourselves.
Hang on, you said the government, it didn't give you the right coming here to get benefits, and then you say after 3 months you do have that right.
Yes, you have the right.
It's not long to wait, is it?
No, it's not, which is why I think the government should look at that, and that's something that Britain can do. I think that's absolutely right, because we saw with the Poles when they came here to work. It's true, what Nigel says, that obviously Bulgaria and Romania are a lot poorer, and I don't think people should be able to get benefits after 3 months. And that's something the government can look at now.
All right, hold on. Now, if you come into Britain, you can get benefits on day one if you say you're self-employed and seeking work. On day one, you can claim benefits.
Man up there, three in the blue shirt with the red tie.
Yes. When these people come from these European countries, are there any checks done on their record, their criminal records, maybe?
Caroline Flint, you want to answer that particular point?
Well, I think if somebody comes to work here and they're working in an environment where there has to be checks, they should be made. But there are issues here about how difficult it is to check those records out. And there is a discussion, I understand, in Europe about some information, about sharing information on people's criminal records, so we can deal with that. But in terms of Joanne's question about public services, I think we should be mindful of pressures put on our public services, because it is true that when the Poland and other countries came in, The numbers that we were advised were likely to come in were an underestimation. They were. And there was concerns in communities about pressures on hospital services, on schools, on housing and other factors as well. So it is right, your question, that we should be mindful of this. It is different this time because, of course, as Grant said, all the other EU member states are opening up at the same time. But I think actually, you know, part of the answer is to look at some of these transitional arrangements. We supported that we should go to the max in this situation, and we would support discussions with the government about whether there should be, given the state of our economy and other countries in the European Union, whether or not we should look for some more flexibility about for the future in terms of
so do you mean when Turkey joins?
What I'm saying...
Is that what you're saying?
Well, I will explain what I'm saying if you give me a chance, Nigel. If there was a way that we could look at next year, yes, I think we should. But also, I think in terms of future expansion of the European Union, I think it is worth a discussion about whether other tightening up of transitional arrangements should happen. But I would say this. I think over 1.5 million people from this country work and live in other parts of the European Union. So it works both ways in terms of flexibility of labour. And the other side of it that is true as well, is that a huge number of businesses depend on our trade with the European Union. So let's reform the European Union. But if we think that Nigel's answer is just to walk away from it, that won't solve any of these issues and will leave us isolated and losing out on the benefits
we may
we
come
get
to
from our
that
membership.
bigger argument later. The man there, you say yes, in the grey.
It may not be a very popular view to take amid all this Farage mania, but I personally believe that when people go out in their German cars to an Italian restaurant or a Chinese takeaway or a Turkish kebab house, drive home, turn on their Chinese televisions and sit down on Swedish settees and start complaining about immigration and how of a bad effect it's had on our country, shouldn't they start thinking that actually these people have came here, they've had a good benefit and they've created a more diverse society that has created a better Britain rather than a worse one?
I'd like to answer this with a kind of local perspective because, you know, I'm not sure that the national politician's speech is always necessarily the best for seeing what's going on in one's own area. And I think the most impressive single document that I've read on this issue actually comes from Boston Council, and it's the Task and Finish Group report about population change in Lincolnshire, in Boston. And I think it does actually answer the question about public services because it looks very carefully at the changes that have been happening in Boston over the last 10 years. It does identify particular management issues with an influx of any kind of population. But at the same time, what it makes absolutely clear is that actually we can cope with this and we can benefit from it. That it is very clear, for example, that the European migrants have a low use of the benefit system, they have a low use of the healthcare system, they tend to be fit young people, and they take very, very, very small amounts of social housing. Only 1% of social housing is actually occupied by people who are economic migrants. And I think this report, but partly because it actually dealt directly with local people's concerns in one particular area with particular agricultural issues, not mass industrial issues, it really did. It managed to draw the right boundary between denying that there's any problem, but also not being, totally catastrophic about it. Our public services can cope.
Okay. I'll take a couple more points. From the woman up there on the far left, and then I come to you in the middle here, and then we'll go on. Yes.
I'm sorry, I really disagree. I have a business in Boston. I have family that live in Boston.
Let's just explain. We're talking about Boston, which is a 65,000 town or so people, about 20 miles south of Lincoln, yes?
Yes, yeah. And we've got land at Boston, and we've had major issues with workers. They've got nowhere to go, camping on our land. We can't move them off because the police aren't interested. Boston is at breaking point. All the locals can't cope anymore. The services, doctors' surgeries, hospitals. I have a family member that's a midwife at Boston Pilgrim Hospital. The facilities are at breaking point because of these people coming into the country, and nothing is being done. And there are hardly any locals there anymore because they're all moving away. You go down to Boston High Street and it's just like you're in a foreign country. It's got to stop.
And these are... Are you talking mainly about people from Poland?
Well, they're from Lithuania, they're all sorts. We've had to have signs made in 5 different languages to say, private land, please no camping. They're all from Poland, Lithuania. Now, I'm half Polish because my grandparents were Polish and came over during the war and fought in the World War II. But we are talking now of a different generation of immigrants, where they're disrespectful and they're not bothered anymore.
Mary Beard, you were talking about Boston. Do you want just briefly to reply to that?
What I got out of the report was it was really the fact that there are huge numbers of myths about the numbers of people who've entered Boston and also their drain on public services. And there was a rather kind of charming coda to this report which said actually the maternity unit at the Pilgrim Hospital had probably been kept open because of the increase in population of Boston rather than being closed.
Now, the chief police officer of Cambridgeshire, your home county, 3 years ago, she said that in fact what was happening was that an intolerable strain was being put on policing hospitals and schools in Cambridgeshire. And that's the common thing that people are finding.
OK. Do you want a brief comment on this? Because you've been silent.
Well, what I was going to say...
You talked about housing. What about these other issues?
Yeah, well,
just briefly, please.
Actually, I had the leaders of Boston Council come to see me when I was local government minister. There certainly are a lot of strains there. They're very concerned that the census information doesn't represent it. Yeah. But actually Boston is an unusual case in that regard. They're right at the extreme end of the stresses on services, which are, I believe, very real in Boston. I think overall it's important to recognise with the 2 countries coming in October that they are able to go to 23 other countries at the same time. That's very different from when that original Polish, for example, immigration occurred where 74,000 people turned up in a time where only about 7,000 people were.
I mean, it does raise the question, she's shaking her head, about whether if somewhere like Boston, if it is as you describe, would be attractive to anybody else to move there.
It is, because you've got the farming land there and you've got the farming where they employ them to pull out the cabbages and things like that. It's encouraging them to come to Boston, and there is nowhere for them to go, so they're just laying on park benches, drinking. We've got a major issue with alcohol, drinking them in the day round the streets, and Boston have actually done where they ban areas, but it's not working.
So sorry, I don't want to stick on this, but just one point to you. Why won't indigenous Bostonians do this work, young people in Boston who are out of work? Why won't they do the work?
I don't know why. Whether it's because it's cheaper to employ.
It's exploitative labour.
Whether it's...
What are you saying? It's exploited labour.
For the big bosses, this is a dream come true. In many cases, they can get these people to work all the hours God sends, for more often than not, way below the minimum wage. And for the big bosses, it's been tremendous. And David, before 2004, the cabbages and the cauliflowers were not rotting in the fields of Lincolnshire. They were still getting picked. So the idea that without this mass influx, the whole place would fall to pieces is just nonsense.
OK, we must go on now. We must go on because we're halfway through this programme. Now, we know that the Prime Minister's speech has been postponed, the one he was going to make tomorrow in Amsterdam about how he intends to approach the issue of our relationship with the EU and the issue of the referendum. And we had expected that would be tomorrow, but it's not. But we do have, of course, a question on what might be in that speech and what the attitude of the government might be. And it's from Rebecca Longhurst, please.
Countries such as Norway and Switzerland have thrived outside of the European Union, but still have strong trading links with the EU member countries. Should the UK follow suit?
Should we follow the example of Norway and Switzerland, have strong trading links and thrive outside the European Union? Roland Rudd.
Definitely not. Those two countries are very different. And it's interesting because Norway pays around 80% per person of what we pay into the European Union budget. And for that, they have no representation on the European Council, Commission, Parliament, and they have to introduce every single rule that comes out of the European Union. So I wouldn't go that way. And Switzerland has around 120 different free trade agreements, which they've built up over decades. And if we were to come out, we'd have to start from scratch. And, you know, even Nigel, with all his energy and vigour and vim, would find that a lot of free trade agreements to have to sign if he was in charge in terms of going from country to country in trying to replicate what Switzerland has done. And the reason that the vast majority of successful businesses want to stay in the European Union, it's about jobs and prosperity. We do nearly half our trade with the European Union. We have half the foreign direct investment comes from the European Union, and that's why they want us to stay there, and I think they're right.
Okay. And if Norway's getting such a rough deal, why doesn't it apply to join as a full member then?
Norway, because they wouldn't, interestingly, their rural voters think that the European Union it doesn't have a restrictive enough policy on agriculture. And of course, we all think it has far too restrictive policy. Right. And it would never ever, they would never ever support it. But their Prime Minister would love to join the European Union, as has said so on many different occasions.
Grant Shapps.
No, I don't think we should have that same relationship. I think that we...
Are you for staying in?
Yeah, I believe that we have a massive advantage from the single market, which we helped to pioneer in this country. It's very important in terms of jobs up and down the country. I think we need to have that access to the marketplace. But I do also think that Europe's changing dramatically. I mean, beyond all possible imagination even 10 years ago, when some people on this panel were campaigning for us to join the euro. We now know that the euro is in a lot of difficulty, and they are going to have to bring those countries closer together for the 17 of them to cooperate. Now, those changes mean that the time is approaching for us to have a discussion, a debate, as we're doing, about the type of Europe that we want to see going forward. What I want to see is us in Europe, trading with Europe, vibrant part of Europe, but I don't want to see us having the relationship which I think is very tiring to the British people at the moment. Our view, which I think is the mainstream view of the British people, is it's time that we had a choice about the kind of Europe that we have.
But would you support a referendum on Europe, A, and B, vote yes for staying in that referendum?
I do want to see us be a part of Europe, and I'm afraid you'll have to wait for the now postponed, for reasons that we know about, Europe speech for the details from the Prime Minister. But I do think that it's right that the British people have a say about all of this, and I think that there is a Europe which could work very well for Britain if it was about trade, if it was more about the ideas that got us into the common market in the first place, that we've moved so far from, and if it was a Europe where the prosperity was put first. I mean, it needs to be an engine of growth in Europe, not something which layers on the bureaucracy and red tape and stops you from growing.
But however the Prime Minister defines what he wants, if he doesn't get it, you'd still vote to stay in.
Well, again, you're going to need to see the detail of what happens tomorrow.
Whatever it is he wants, if he doesn't get it, you'd still vote to stay in.
I believe, you're sort of asking me a hypothetical question before we get there. What I believe is this, and I'll be absolutely clear as I can, make sure no one's in any confusion at all. I think that there is a better deal. You might be right. I think there is a better deal that a better relationship that Britain can have with Europe, which is more in Britain's interest. And I believe that we have a sort of duty to go and negotiate and investigate that, and then make a decision as a country.
Okay. Caroline Flint, do you think the government's going the right way about all this?
No, I don't. And Norway and Switzerland, they have to pay their dues and abide by the rules, but they have no say in any of the decision-making about the way those rules are set. And I do think that David Cameron and the government are going the wrong way about this, because David Cameron is getting himself boxed in by his party. It's not about the national interest. It's about his confidence, I have to say, and leadership, which is weakening, in running his own party. And the truth is that we do need to, I think, look at reform of the European Union. But any traction we have as a country to build alliances with others who are like-minded in the European Union is being undermined by the statements that are made by David Cameron around an in-out referendum, and that totally dominating the debate and not letting us get on with the real issues about getting jobs and growth back into Europe, because that's uppermost in people's minds about their future. Are they going to have a job? Are they going to have prosperity? Tackling the issues around the Eurozone, and then tackling real reform, like, for example, cutting the EU budget, looking at some of the issues around how we can better support businesses in our own country. So we've got all this noise about a referendum, but we're not actually dealing in the here and now with the things that really are important for us as British citizens.
Hold on a minute. Hold on. This is all very confusing. Whilst you guys were in power for 13 years, you signed us up to 3 European treaties. We had no say. I voted against Lisbon when I was in Parliament. We had no say over them at all. Your leader, Ed Miliband, has said he doesn't think that Brussels has too much power, and yet you're sat here now saying you do think that we should go and negotiate. It's a direct quote. You voted against a new law that we've introduced that says no more power can be passed to Europe without a proper referendum of the British people. You voted against it. Today, Ed Miliband said he might be in favour of that law. The truth is, the Conservative Party is mainstream, leading on Europe. You guys, the Labour Party, are all over the place with it, following us.
Well... Can I come back on that?
Yes,
very briefly.
Another voice.
Well, it's a nice try, Grant, but actually we did manage to get reform, for example, to the Common Agricultural Policy. There's more needs to be done on that front.
You gave away the British rebate.
We did.
You gave away a large section of the British rebate. What for in return? It was supposed to be for reform to the Common Agricultural Policy, but there was no reform.
We did get reforms on the Common Agricultural Policy. We did make some changes in terms of getting more parity with France in terms of the amount that we put into the European Union. But the truth is, in terms of legislation...
billions.
All right, don't interrupt each other and come to an end.
In terms
of
legislation,
Caroline.
actually, we didn't vote against the proposal. There is legislation on the books that says if there's a transfer of powers from the UK, there should be a referendum, and we support that. But we've been very clear. We need to make reform by, for example, cutting the EU budget. We need to look at the ways in which we can better support through our British businesses through changes to the rules around state aid and structural funds. And I've already said that we need to look at issues about countries coming in and the arrangements that should be changed in the future.
OK, before I come to the other 2 speakers, I did 1 or 2 members of the audience. You said in the 3rd row there.
I mean, how can we be part of an organisation when the European Court can actually tell the government of the day who they cannot deport, i.e. a suspected terrorist last year?
Yes, that's not actually the EU, but the previous court. But hold on.
It is linked to it.
Yeah, it's linked, but it's not directly. The man at the very back with spectacles.
It's interesting that from where I'm sitting, it appears that, in spite of the argument, both the government and the opposition are saying the same thing.
No.
OK, well, we'll bring in Nigel Farage on that, and then I'll come to some other speakers. Nigel Farage.
Well, I have to say that everybody from David Cameron to half this panel say, wouldn't it be terrible if we were like Norway and Switzerland? Really? They're rich, they're happy, they're self-governing, and unlike the fishermen in Lincolnshire out of Boston, what the Norwegians have got is 200 miles of a North Sea where all the fish in those sea are their own, and they've got a thriving fishing industry. So, the whole European debate.
Oil, Nigel.
The whole, yes, and we've got oil and shale gas now. So stop knocking Britain and let's get back what is rightfully ours. You guys, who supported this European project, betrayed the British fishing industry. It was a disgraceful thing to do, and it's cost 100,000 men their jobs. So shame on all of you that did that to us, and I want to get that back. But the whole debate now is being dominated by a whole series of economic scare stories. We're being told by all the parties that 3 million jobs would be lost if we weren't part of the European Union. Oh no, they wouldn't. The European Union sells us far more than we sell them. Mercedes, Audi and Volkswagen will go on selling their cars in this country regardless whether we're in a political union or not. That's common sense, that's trade. But it's all a smokescreen. It's all a smokescreen which really hides a bigger question, than an economic debate that most people find very difficult to make their minds up on. The real question here is, do we want to be a self-governing, democratic nation that determines her own destiny and runs her own house, or not? That's what this comes down to, and I passionately believe that we should be a self-governing democracy, that we should be proud of who we are, run our own affairs, and not just trade with Europe, but actually do far more with the rest of the world, the Commonwealth, and countries like that.
Nigel.
But actually, more important than what I think, and more important than what this panel thinks, what is disgraceful is the way these three parties have frankly just lied to us at every single general election, all promising us a referendum, and then you've got Clegg who's U-turned on it, you've got the Labour Party who've U-turned on it, and the best we might get from David Cameron is a faint promise from the man who previously gave us a cast-iron guarantee we might get a vote in 5 years' time.
Roland,
it's
right,
not good
I'm going to bring in Mary Beard, but do you want to... This is a direct Farage against you. Do you want to reply to it before I come to it?
I'd like to very quickly. I mean, we have a burgeoning car industry now. It employs 700,000 people. It's 10% of our exports. If we were to come out of the European Union, we'd have taxes on this from between 5 and 20%. Honda have said they'd pull out. Nissan have made similar concerns public. We can't put at risk our fragile recovery by coming out of the biggest trading bloc in the world. For what? For ideology? No, we've got to put British jobs first,
he says.
all the time.
He says for self-government and democracy.
No, it's not about self-democracy.
That's what he says.
Yes, I understand.
What's your answer to him when he says we want to decide our own future in Westminster?
Listen, in 2 years' time there'll be a general election. If people think Europe's the most important issue and they want us to leave the European Union, people will vote UKIP and Nigel will become Prime Minister. But until then, no.
Mary Beard. And I know a lot of people got their hands up. I'll come to you in just a second. Mary Beard.
I find it dead hard to choose between the scare stories and the kind of simplistic little England kind of speech that Nigel's given us.
Do you believe in democracy, Mary? Do you believe in self-government or not?
Probably as much as you do, Nigel.
No, clearly. No, clearly.
But, let me finish, because I started off being extremely opposed to any idea of a referendum. And I know all the reasons against a referendum. I know it's the uncertainty that it will bring. Its timing is unclear, and so forth. In the last week or so, I've come to think maybe we should have a referendum, because then possibly it would give us the chance to quash some of the silly scare stories about Europe. Perhaps the context of a referendum debate would enable us to say, look, this is what this country has got out of Europe. We're talking here about restrictions on dangerous landfill, about clean beaches, about economic advantages, which at the moment gets clouded out by the spurious eloquence of Mr. Farage. We've really benefited. Our lives have changed for the better.
So you're not in favour of us following the Norwegian example or adopting the Norwegian example?
Well, we know that it's very expensive and no power to adopt the Norwegian example. It's a bit like going into a football match where you make the other side play on the offside rule and you're somehow free of it. You know, you can't cherry pick the rules and integration you have.
Let's hear from some members of our audience. You in the second row, yes.
I have to ask, you've said that Conservatives are the leading members of trying to do the EU referendum. Nigel said that it's an empty promise. Are we simply seeing Cameron seeing forward to the general election in a couple of years' time and seeing that his voters are now becoming more Eurosceptic and going to UKIP? And is that all we're seeing now?
No, I think the position in the country as a whole is that people are strongly in favour of us having a kind of a relationship with Europe that works for us. It's a long time since people in this country were given any kind of choice over Europe. Europe's changed beyond all recognition in that period of time, and I think it is right to actually go back to the British people and ask, is this the kind of Europe that you want to belong to? Would a reformed relationship work better? And I think that's a good, honest choice, which is what the mainstream view of the British people is, and it's something that people will get if they vote Conservative at the next election.
Okay, and I go to the woman in the centre, and then I come to you out there, sir. Yes, you.
Aren't we to be mindful that we're paying, is it 15 or 16 million pounds a year to Europe? Are we getting our money value from them?
Do you feel you're getting your money's worth?
No, I don't.
You don't? And you, sir, on the far right there?
Yeah, it's about
not a political description, simply a physical description.
It's mainly partly about the currency. I don't like the way the European is trying to go towards a single common domestic policy, but they can't make their money work. And once that is made true, those who say the euro is irreversible are behaving like the Iraqi information minister. It's pretty ridiculous, really.
And a couple more points. You said the spectacles, and I'll come to you here.
It's totally ridiculous to suggest that the Germans will let us renegotiate the terms of going in Europe. So the best bet we could possibly do is get out of Europe. Let's face it, Europe's in a complete mess. The euro's a complete mess. Why would we want to be part of a club where we put £50 million a week in and we get very little out of it? And to suggest that they won't buy our goods if we come out of Europe is total nonsensical. The export sales have gone up today. The car sales have gone up. They've gone up primarily because of the sales going into China and India.
Okay, and the woman here on the left.
I don't think we should come out of Europe at all, but I think a referendum would be a good idea. But I think before we have a referendum, we need to get rid of the media coverage of this that actually just completely either says Europe is a terrible, terrible place, or it says Europe is a great place, and we don't actually know any truth. We would be answering a referendum on something that we don't know anything about really properly, in my view.
You don't think
have the
that,
education for it.
You don't think the political battle
No, they just
helps
argue amongst
enlighten
themselves
you at
about whether
all?
it's good or bad, and I don't think we really know enough about what Europe does for us, what it benefits us
Okay,
with.
and one more point for the person in the centre there. Yes.
Yeah, I agree with the lady just then. I think we are not educated enough. It's all biased opinion of one political party or another. I think we need better education and facts about how Europe's organised and where we
back to
fall
1975
into that.
when they did all that.
I was only 4 then.
All right. Well, that's one of the points.
Quite right.
Let's go on because we've only 10 minutes or so left. Just as a little light relief, Carol Jackson, please.
In these times of austerity, should we consider introducing horse meat as a cheaper alternative to beef?
Should we have horse meat as a cheaper alternative to beef? Mary Beard, do you have any objection to eating horse meat? You're probably vegetarian,
I have no, I've eaten horse meat and much enjoyed it. And I'm sure the horse meat trade in this country, if there is any, is absolutely thanking all this publicity. It's given it the best publicity it's ever had. You know, this is where kind of a sort of vague sense that one's almost an anthropologist comes upon one. You know, because it is. And this is relevant, really, to our discussion about Europe. What is absolutely extraordinary is how we still define ourselves according to which animals we are prepared or not to eat. Actually, moggy would be very nice and chewy and tasty, but none of us want to do that. We're all, if we're not vegetarian, we're happy with chicken. And horse divides Europe, but I can tell you I had it deep fried in Slovenia and it was gorgeous.
Okay. I can't resist the worst joke of the day, which is, what do you put on your burger? A fiver each way.
The point is, the burgers tasted better because they had horse in it instead of the other.
I'm not going to try stand up. Caroline Flint.
I saw a clip on TV today that suggested after World War II, actually, when rationing was still on, there was an attempt to introduce horse meat to the British diet, but it didn't work. What I do know is if there was a market for it, people would be getting it. But I think in terms of eating it, what you want to know is what you're eating, and that you have a choice about what you're eating, and that clearly is at the heart of this situation we've got at the moment. When people thought they were eating beef burgers and the other things it said on the packet that might be in there, what they didn't realise that not only were they eating horse, but they were also maybe eating pork as well. And I think it's about knowing what you're eating is really important.
Roland.
Well, I've never knowingly eaten horse meat, but that probably means I've had quite a lot of it. But I do think the serious point is you must label this properly, because it is nothing short of scandalous for big supermarkets to put in horse meat and not tell their customers that that's what they're eating. We really can't have that.
Nigel Farage.
I think the real shock of this is we discover that one of the burgers had up to 29% horse meat in it. So the answer to the question is we already do, I suppose. But the real shock is that this was discovered in Ireland. It wasn't discovered here. So we've got big supermarkets who've been selling really rather large quantities of this, and nobody has picked this up or discovered it. We already slaughter over 10,000 horses a year in this country, which we export to other parts of Europe. And I do think that this won't end with horse meat. I'll make a prediction. The next big story on this will be salami, when people realise the amount of salami imported into Britain that is made with donkey meat. So I think this has opened up quite a big debate about what we eat, and I think the calls... I'm never one really for government legislation, but I think the consumer does deserve to know, truthfully, what is in the package of meat they buy, and that's going to have to be addressed.
You, sir.
I think Mr Farage makes quite a valid point around, I think 10,000 slaughter is quite a conservative estimate. Wow. I've been to horse sales where horses are being sold at a tenner a time, and it's the meat guys that are taking those horses away. Every horse really should have a passport so it doesn't get into the food chain, and I wonder how much that's strictly controlled as well.
Because Shapps is chairman of the Conservative Party, he's in charge.
I'm in charge of many things, but probably not the horses. But I would say that the Food Standards Agency obviously going to look into this, and will report back. And I think it is a serious matter for the wrong food to get into the food chain. But it could get me wondering why it is we think some animals are sort of socially acceptable to eat and others are not. And I think the answer is we basically eat animals that don't themselves eat animals. So we eat animals which are on, eat grass and what have you.
Horses eat grass.
That's an answer.
If only it was so
It's
simple.
not so simple, is it? That's not the answer. I thought I'd cracked it.
Other animals.
No, maybe that's not
Try
right.
again.
We don't eat animals that eat animals, do we? Only cannibals.
That's right.
And Mary Beard likes cats, but that's not...
She wants to eat her cat.
She
No, that
wants
is
to eat
right.
her
We
cat.
don't,
That's
that's
right.
right.
Saying my cat
This is right
wants to be
after all. We don't eat animals that eat other animals. We only
okay.
eat animals that feed off grass.
Okay, fine. Let's go on. We're now coming... We've got 10 minutes or so, 5 minutes or so towards the end. Now, this is obviously very... in the light of what's going on in Algeria, particularly pertinent question from Duncan Curtis, please. Duncan Curtis.
Is Mali in danger of becoming the next Afghanistan, and should the UK get involved at any level? And
the level we're involved at is seems to be mainly transport and support and training, as now has emerged, of the Malian army. Grant Shapps to the government.
Well, I think that the situation's obviously very serious. 210,000 people have already fled. There's a couple 100,000 people who are displaced within Mali. We have a very close cooperation with the French and undertakings to assist and vice versa. And so we quickly offered the help of a couple of transport C-17s. I think that's the right action. We're not going to be involved on the ground. But I think that providing humanitarian aid and assistance is absolutely
Isn't
right.
that how all these interventions start, saying we're not going to be involved on the ground, we're not going to...
Look, and actually it's often how they finish. I mean, we only have to look back a year or two to look what happened in Libya, where we enforced a no-fly zone and there was a very successful outcome. So, yes, it is, but it's clearly the French taking the lead. And we provided them, I think, with practical, sensible assistance.
Have you given them everything they've asked Britain for?
Yes.
Because there's been some criticism from Mr Kushner, the former foreign minister, about what we've provided.
Well, I think we've...
Have you answered all the questions with the provision of what...
I think we've provided all the practical assistance, transport, and also some expertise on the ground.
All right. Nigel Farage.
Yes, there is a danger, of course, in a region like that if you get involved in some form of conflict, that it will go on for a very long time. As we've learnt from Afghanistan, we've now been there for longer than the entire duration of the First and Second World Wars. Going to war is just about the most serious thing, biggest decision that a government can take, and yet Tony Blair seemed to go to war at the drop of a hat. I hoped we'd learnt from that, but it appears we haven't. Because this administration, with very little thought, got involved in Libya. We're now getting involved, OK, perhaps it's just assistance in Mali. And I would say this, I don't want my country getting involved in endless foreign wars that are not in our national interest, that, if anything, make this country a more dangerous place, in my view, rather than a safer one? And can we please stop getting involved in endless military conflicts with the cost not just in money but British human lives? I've had enough of all these foreign wars.
Just to clarify this, your answer to the French would be no.
Absolutely.
Caroline Flint. Labour's answer?
But I hope, in answer to Duncan's question, it's not the case that this turns into another Afghanistan. But I do think that we also need to recognise that the actions that are taken by some of these groups, which don't necessarily seem to have a political objective, but just want to rule by violence and terrorism, may just happen in somewhere like Mali or in Algeria or elsewhere, but at some point it may come knocking at our door as well. So what we do and how we support, there isn't a one-size-fits-all in all of this, but I think we do have to be mindful of the implications of the sort of actions by these groups and how they do cross borders. The other issue, I think, as well, is that we have British nationals working all around the world. And obviously, clearly, an example of this is in the gas station in Algeria today, where alongside French nationals, Canadians, Japanese workers in this industry. And therefore, of course, we're going to be concerned about the interests and the safety and security of our citizens working overseas.
You know, you cover all these holes, and then another one spot, and we are the first one to offer the finger to try and pull over the hole. Every time, why did they come to us? I don't remember the French running at our aid when we went down to the Falklands.
The most depressing thing from my point of view, apart from the obviously terrible loss of life, is the kind of sense that we have been here before. You know, we've seen this, we're going to do some airstrikes, will that be enough? No, somebody's going to send foot soldiers in. And worst, we all suddenly become horribly, spuriously expert in a kind of country we really know nothing about. 2 weeks ago, I could guess not one of us in this room knew the capital of Mali. And now we're all talking about Mali as if we understood it, and we don't.
I think, to Duncan's question, I think we were right to give the assistance to the French, but I'd say this much and no further. And despite the extraordinary job the British Army has done in Afghanistan, and it has been extraordinary, and those soldiers have been extraordinary, we must remember that we are now asking our army to do more for less, and that isn't right.
Okay. I'm going to end with one point from you, sir, in the grey there on the left.
I'm just wondering if the current government might reverse the cutbacks to the MOD as cost-saving measures if we are going to get involved, even in logistical support with the C-17s that have gone to Mali. It might wake them up to thinking, like you said, we're asking our troops to do more for less, and the pressures we're putting on individual servicemen and their families.
Yeah.
The good news is there was a £37 billion hole in the defence budget. It's now fixed. And sending 2 C-17 planes, which will probably be being used somewhere in any case, to go and help save potentially tens or even hundreds of thousands of lives, I think something Britain can be proud of.
All right, that's it. Our time's up. Thank you very much, all of you. We're going to be in Weymouth next week. The editor of Private Eye, Ian Hislop's going to be one of the panellists in Weymouth. The week after that, we're going to be in Lancaster. To come to either of these programmes, the usual drill: apply via our website, which is on the screen there, or call 0330 123 9988. Thank you all, my panellists, and thank you all for coming here to Lincoln tonight to take part in this edition of Question Time. And until next Thursday, good night.
With more on the hostage crisis in Algeria as former UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan talks to Andrew Neil, This Week follows in a moment here on BBC One.